the holy priest and the bandit. Father Michael never thought he'd have to choose between his vows and his conscience. But when the most dangerous outlaw on the West rode into his small Texas church on Christmas Eve 1883, everything changed. This is the true story of the holy priest and the bandit. Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm bringing you something different. An action-packed true story from the American frontier that sounds too incredible to be real. But I spent months verifying this through historical records, newspaper archives, and church documents from the 1880s. This is the story of Father Michael O'Brien, an Irish immigrant priest who served a small congregation in Cedar Ridge, Texas. A man of God who was forced to become a warrior, a pacifist who had to take up arms, and a shepherd who had to hunt wolves to protect his flock. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, because this story has everything: action, redemption, faith, betrayal, and one of the most intense Christmas confrontations you've ever heard. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. Father O'Brien wasn't always a priest. Before he took his vows, he was something else entirely. Something he tried to bury. Something that would come roaring back when he needed it most. Cedar Ridge, Texas, 1883. Population, 247. One church, one general store, one saloon, and miles of open desert in every direction. This was the edge of civilization, where the rule of law barely reached and survival was a daily challenge. Father Michael O'Brien arrived in Cedar Ridge in 1878, a quiet man in his late 30s with an Irish accent and a mysterious past. He never talked about his life before the priesthood. The townsfolk respected that everyone on the frontier was running from something. What they did know, Father Michael was kind, educated, and completely dedicated to his small congregation. He taught the children to read. He mediated disputes. He married couples, baptized babies, and buried the dead. He lived simply in a small room behind the church, owned nothing but his Bible and his vestments. The church itself was humble: wooden planks, a simple cross, hand-carved pews. But Father Michael kept it immaculate. It was the heart of Cedar Ridge, the one place where people could find peace in an unforgiving land. But in December 1883, everything changed, because that's when word reached Cedar Ridge that the notorious outlaw gang known as the Red River Bandits was heading their way, and their leader, a man called Black Jack Morrison, had a particular hatred for men of God. Let me tell you about the Red River Bandits. They weren't your typical outlaws. Between 1880 and 1883, they'd robbed 17 banks, killed at least 23 people, and burned down 4 towns across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Their leader, Black Jack Morrison, was wanted in 5 territories with a $5,000 bounty on his head, a fortune in 1883. He got his nickname from his jet black horse and his preference for attacking at night, but he was also known for his cruelty. Witnesses said he enjoyed causing pain, that he'd kill without hesitation or remorse. Morrison had 6 men in his gang. Snake Eyes Pete, his second-in-command, deadly with a rifle. The Dalton brothers, twins who handled explosives. Crazy Carl Hoffman, unpredictable and violent. Miguel El Fantasma Rodriguez, a former Mexican army deserter. And Tommy, the Kid Sullivan, only 19 but already wanted for murder. But here's what made Morrison especially dangerous to Father Michael. He had a vendetta against the Catholic Church. His wife and daughter had died of fever while under the care of Mission in Santa Fe. Morrison blamed the priest for not saving them, and since then, he'd made it his mission to destroy every church he came across. The Texas Rangers sent a telegram to Cedar Ridge. Red River Bandits heading your way. Evacuate immediately. No military support available. But Father Michael refused to leave, and when the townspeople asked him why, his answer would reveal the first glimpse of who he really was. Sheriff Tom Harrison called an emergency meeting at the church. Every able-bodied person in Cedar Ridge was there: ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers, even the saloon owner. "Folks, we need to evacuate," Sheriff Harrison said. "The Rangers can't reach us in time. Morrison's gang will be here in 3 days, maybe less." People started packing immediately. Wagons were loaded. Families prepared to flee to Fort Worth, 50 miles east. But Father Michael stood at the altar and said something that shocked everyone. "I'm staying." "Father, "That's suicide," the sheriff protested. "Morrison will burn this church to the ground with you in it. This church is all these people have." Father Michael replied calmly, "If I run, I abandon not just a building, but everything it represents. Faith, hope, the belief that good can stand against evil." "You're one man," someone shouted. "A priest. What are you going to do against 7 killers?" Father Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made everyone in that room go silent. "I wasn't always a priest, and I wasn't always a peaceful man." That night, Father Michael asked Sheriff Harrison to stay behind after everyone left. What he revealed to the sheriff would change everything, because Father Michael O'Brien wasn't just a priest. He was also someone the sheriff had heard of, someone legendary. "Before I came to Cedar Ridge," Father Michael began, "before I took my vows, I went by a different name, Michael the Hammer O'Brien." Sheriff Harrison's jaw dropped. Every lawman in the West knew that name. Michael the Hammer O'Brien had been one of the most feared bounty hunters in America during the 1860s and 70s. He'd brought in over 40 wanted men, most of them alive, but some weren't. He earned his nickname because of his weapon of choice. He could throw a hammer with deadly accuracy at 50 feet, and he was lightning fast with a pistol. But O'Brien wasn't just skilled, he was ruthless. He tracked men through impossible terrain. He survived ambushes that should have killed him. He'd been shot 4 times and kept fighting. In 1876, I tracked a man named William Becker across 3 states. Father Michael continued, his voice heavy with old pain. He'd murdered a family, parents and 3 children. When I finally caught him, he surrendered, but I was so angry. I killed him anyway, shot him in cold blood while he was on his knees begging for mercy. The sheriff listened in stunned silence. I realized I'd become the very thing I was hunting, a killer. So I turned to my guns, donated every dollar I'd earned to the church, and took vows. I promised God I would never take another life, that Michael O'Brien was dead, and Father Michael would take his place. "But now," the sheriff asked, "now I have a choice to make. Keep my vows and watch Morrison destroy everything good in this town, or break those vows and become what I swore I'd never be again." The sheriff offered Father Michael something that night, something that would test everything he believed in, and what happened next would set in motion 3 days of preparation that would turn a humble church into a battlefield. "I'll help you," Sheriff Harrison said, "but you need to understand, if you do this, there's no going back. You'll have blood on your hands again." "I know," Father Michael replied, "and I'll answer to God for it, but I won't let Morrison hurt anyone else." Over the next 3 days, while the town evacuated, Father Michael and Sheriff Harrison prepared. But the priest was adamant about one thing. "I will defend the church and stop Morrison, but I will not become a murderer again. Every man deserves a chance to surrender." They started by fortifying the church, reinforced the doors with iron bars from a blacksmith, created firing positions in the bell tower, stockpiled water and medical supplies, set up early warning systems using mirrors to catch sunlight. But the most shocking moment came when Father Michael walked into the church basement and opened a trunk he'd kept locked for 7 years. Inside were the tools of his former life. 2 Colt .45 revolvers, perfectly maintained, a Winchester rifle, throwing knives, and his signature weapon, a perfectly balanced carpenter's hammer. Sheriff Harrison watched as Father Michael checked each weapon with the practiced ease of a professional. The priest's hands didn't shake. His movements were fluid, automatic. Michael the Hammer O'Brien hadn't disappeared. He'd just been sleeping. But Father Michael made one critical decision that would change the course of the coming battle. He decided to do something that seemed insane. He would face Morrison alone. The sheriff would stay hidden as backup, but Father Michael would confront the gang first. Why? Because he believed that even Black Jack Morrison deserved a chance at redemption. On the morning of December 22nd, 1883, the last wagon left Cedar Ridge. The town was empty except for Father Michael and Sheriff Harrison. Families said emotional goodbyes to their priest. Mrs. Henderson, who'd lost her husband a year before, gripped Father Michael's hands. "You've given us so much." Please don't die for us." "I'm not planning to die," Father Michael replied with a slight smile. "I'm planning to make sure you have a home to come back to." Young Timothy Cooper, only 8 years old, looked up at the priest and asked, "Father Michael, is it a sin to fight bad men?" Father Michael knelt down to the boy's level. "Timothy, there's a difference between violence born from hate and strength used to protect the innocent. I pray God understands that difference. And I pray I have the wisdom to know when to fight and when to show mercy." As the last wagon disappeared over the horizon, Father Michael stood alone in front of his church. The Texas sun beat down on the empty street. Somewhere out there, 7 killers were riding toward him. He walked into the church, knelt before the altar, and prayed. Not for victory, not for survival, but for the strength to do what was right, even if it cost him everything. At sunset on December 23rd, the Scouts' Father Michael had position reported back. The Red River Bandits were 10 miles out. They'd arrive by morning. But something unexpected happened that night that would give Father Michael a crucial advantage. One of Morrison's own men would betray him. Around midnight, a figure appeared at the church door. Father Michael, who was keeping watch from the bell tower, drew his revolver. But then he heard a voice. "Father, don't shoot. I'm not here to fight." It was Tommy Sullivan, the youngest member of Morrison's gang. The kid was only 19, with a baby face that made him look even younger. But his eyes were old, haunted. Father Michael came down cautiously, gun still drawn. "Why are you here, son?" "I can't do it anymore," Tommy said, voice breaking. "I thought being an outlaw meant being free. But all I've done is help Morrison kill innocent people. I'm going to hell, Father. I know it." "Why now?" Father Michael asked. "Why leave on this job?" "Because I heard Morrison talking. He doesn't just want to rob this town. He wants to burn the church with you inside it. Make an example. I've done bad things, Father, but I won't be part of burning a priest alive in church. That's too far." Father Michael studied the young man. He could see the genuine anguish in Tommy's face. This was a soul crying out for redemption. "Tell me about Morrison's plan," Father Michael said. What Tommy revealed about Morrison's strategy would force Father Michael to completely change his approach. Because Morrison wasn't just planning a direct assault. He had something far more devious in mind. Tommy laid out the entire plan. "Morrison knows you're here alone. He knows the town evacuated. He's planning to arrive at dawn on Christmas Eve. He thinks that's poetic, destroying a church on the holiest night of the year. But here's the trick. He's not coming in guns blazing. He's going to send Miguel and Crazy Carl to circle around back, while he approaches from the front with a white flag. He'll pretend to negotiate, ask for food and supplies. The moment you let your guard down, the men in back will set fire to the church while the rest gun you down from the front." Father Michael nodded slowly. "Thank you for this information, Tommy. Now I have a question for you. Do you want redemption?" "More than anything," Tommy said. "But I've killed 3 men. I've robbed. Do you repent?" "Truly." "Yes, Father. God help me, yes." "Then you'll have your chance to prove it. Here's what we're going to do." Father Michael spent the next hour with Tommy, hearing his confession, giving him absolution, and explaining a new plan, one that would turn Morrison's trap back on him. What Father Michael didn't tell Tommy was that he'd made a decision that night. If he survived this battle, he would leave the priesthood, because he knew that once he picked up those guns, once he shed blood, even in defense of others, he would no longer be worthy to stand at the altar. This would be his last act as Father Michael O'Brien. December 24th, 1883, Christmas Eve. Father Michael woke before dawn and performed his morning prayers. He dressed in his priest's vestments, black cassock, white collar. He wanted Morrison to see exactly who he was fighting. Then he strapped on his gun belt. The weight felt familiar, like greeting an old friend he'd tried to forget. He loaded both revolvers, checked the Winchester, and slipped throwing knives into his belt. Sheriff Harrison took his position in the general store across the street, with a clear view of the church entrance. Tommy Sullivan, now fighting for redemption, hid in the livery stable with orders to stop any flanking attempt. At 6:47 a.m., As the sun broke over the horizon, 6 riders appeared at the end of Main Street. Black Jack Morrison rode at the front on his namesake black stallion. Even from a distance, he cut an imposing figure. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with thick black beard and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Behind him rode Snake Eyes Pete, the Dalton brothers Crazy Carl, and Miguel. Each man was armed to the teeth. Morrison held up a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel, the universal sign of truce. Father Michael stepped out of the church and stood on the steps, arms at his sides, gun belt visible but hands away from his weapons. The 2 men locked eyes across 50 yards of empty street. "You must be the priest." Morrison called out, "The one too stubborn to run." "I am Father Michael O'Brien." The priest called back, "And this is my church. You're not welcome here." Morrison laughed, a cold, joyless sound. "A priest with a gun belt. Now that's rich. What would Jesus think?" "Jesus drove the money changers from the temple with a whip." Father Michael replied calmly, "Sometimes even the Lord uses force to protect the sacred." "I'm here to make you an offer," Morrison said, walking his horse closer. "Give us whatever supplies are left in that church, and any money hidden there, and we'll ride on. Nobody has to die today." Father Michael knew this was a lie. He could see Miguel and Crazy Carl exchanging glances, preparing to break off with their flanking maneuver. "I have a counteroffer," Father Michael said. "You and your men surrender to me right now. You'll face trial, but you'll live. This is your one chance to choose redemption over damnation." Morrison's laugh died. His face went cold. "You think you can take all 6 of us? You're one man, a priest." Father Michael's voice dropped, and suddenly there was steel in it. The voice of Michael the Hammer O'Brien. "I'm not just a priest, and you're not facing just one man. You're facing the wrath of everyone you've ever hurt, every family you destroyed, every town you burned. Today that debt comes due." Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, and that's when everything exploded into violence. What happened next would become legendary in Texas history. A battle that lasted less than 10 minutes, but felt like an eternity. A confrontation between good and evil that would end with bodies in the street and a church still standing. This is how Father Michael became a warrior. Morrison drew first, but Father Michael was faster. The priest's hand flashed to his Colt, and he fired in one smooth motion. The bullet hit Morrison's gun hand, sending the outlaw's pistol flying. Morrison roared in pain and wheeled his horse around as his gang opened fire. Father Michael dug behind a water trough as bullets chewed up the church steps behind him. He came up firing, each shot deliberate and controlled. His first bullet hit Snake Eyes Pete in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse. His second shattered the Dalton brothers' rifle. Sheriff Harrison opened up from across the street, his rifle booming. One of the Dalton twins went down, clutching his leg. But Miguel and Crazy Carl had broken off his plan, racing around the side of the church toward the back entrance. This was exactly what Father Michael had expected. Tommy Sullivan stepped out of the livery stable, positioned between the flankers and their objective. "Miguel, Carl, don't do this," Tommy shouted. "We can still walk away." "You little traitor," Crazy Carl screamed, raising his pistol. Tommy dug behind a barrel as bullets flew. He returned fire, his shots wild but effective enough to pin the 2 men down. But Morrison had a backup plan. As the gunfight erupted, he signaled to the remaining Dalton brother, who pulled something from his saddlebag, dynamite. They were going to blow the church apart regardless. And Father Michael had exactly 30 seconds to stop them. Father Michael saw the dynamite and knew he had to act immediately. He burst from cover, running straight at the Dalton brother who was lighting the fuse. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet. One grazed his shoulder, tearing through his cassock. But he didn't stop. 20 yards. 15. 10. The Dalton brother raised his gun to shoot, but Father Michael's hand went to his belt. In one fluid motion, he drew his signature hammer and threw it. The hammer spun through the air, covering 30 feet in a second. It struck the Dalton brother in the chest with devastating force, knocking him backward off his horse. The lit dynamite flew from his hands, tumbling toward the church. 5 seconds until detonation. Father Michael ran. scooped up the dynamite, and in a move that defied sanity, hurled it as far as he could toward the empty desert beyond town. The dynamite exploded in midair, the shockwave knocking everyone to the ground. Dust and debris rained down on the street. For a moment, everything was silent except for ringing ears. Then Morrison, blood pouring from his hand, stumbled to his feet. His face was twisted with rage. "You think you've won, priest? I'm going to kill you with my bare hands." The outlaw leader charged, drawing a knife with his good hand. Father Michael met him head-on. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand fight that would test everything Father Michael had learned in his violent past. Two warriors locked in combat, fighting not just for victory but for their very souls. And only one would walk away. Morrison was bigger and fueled by rage. He slashed with his knife, forcing Father Michael to dodge and weave. The priest couldn't reach his guns. Morrison was too close, too fast. They grappled, crashing to the church doors, fighting among the pews Father Michael had lovingly carved. Morrison drove his knee into Father Michael's ribs, knocking the wind out of him. "Your God won't save you." Morrison screamed, raising the knife for a killing blow. But Father Michael caught his wrist, their faces inches apart. The priest looked into the outlaw's eyes and said something that stopped Morrison cold. "He's not my God. He's ours. And it's not too late for you." For just a moment, something flickered in Morrison's eyes. Confusion, pain, maybe even regret. But then it hardened back to hate. "It's too late for me. Has been for years." Morrison twisted, trying to drive the knife down. Father Michael shifted his weight and executed a move he'd learned decades ago, a disarm and throw that sent Morrison flying over a pew, crashing into the altar. The outlaw tried to rise, but Father Michael was on him, pinning him down. The priest's fist drew back, ready to deliver a blow that could kill. But he didn't. Instead, Father Michael grabbed Morrison by his collar and hauled him upright. "I said you have a choice. I meant it. Surrender. Face justice. Or die here in this church. Choose." Outside, the sound of fighting had stopped. Sheriff Harrison had subdued the wounded gang members. Tommy had successfully held off the flankers until they surrendered. Morrison looked around the church, at the simple altar, the hand-carved cross, the sunlight streaming through the windows. Something broke in him. "I surrender," he whispered. Then louder, "I surrender." By noon on Christmas Eve, it was over. Sheriff Harrison had Morrison and his gang tied up in the local jail. Two of the gang members had serious but not fatal wounds. Miraculously, no one had died, not even Tommy Sullivan, who'd been shot in the arm but fought through it. Father Michael sat on the church steps, his cassock torn and bloody, but alive. His shoulder wound was superficial. He'd bruised ribs and countless scrapes, but nothing permanent. The sheriff approached him. "Father, what you did today." "Michael, I've never seen anything like it. You took on 6 armed killers and didn't kill a single one. That's not just skill. That's something else." "It was luck," Father Michael said quietly. "And maybe something more." "What happens now?" the sheriff asked. Father Michael looked at his church, damaged but standing. Bullet holes in the door, broken windows, blood on the steps. But the cross still stood tall. "Now we wait for Christmas," Father Michael said. That evening, Father Michael tended to Tommy Sullivan's wound in the church. "What's going to happen to me?" Tommy asked. "I'm still wanted. I've still got crimes to answer for." "You'll face trial," Father Michael said, "but I'll testify on your behalf. You risked your life to save this town. That has to count for something." "Father, why did you spare Morrison? After everything he's done, you had him. You could have ended it." Father Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I'd killed him, I would have proven him right, that violence is the only answer, that some men are beyond saving. I refuse to believe that. Every soul deserves a chance at redemption, Tommy. Even Morrison's. Even mine." Tommy began to cry, the first honest tears he'd shed in years. Word spread quickly that Father Michael had survived. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, families began returning to Cedar Ridge. They came in wagons, on horseback, on foot. They found their town intact, their church standing. their priest alive. That night, Father Michael held Christmas Eve service. The church was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the aisles, sat on the floor, crowded in the doorway. Father Michael stood at the altar, still wearing his torn cassock, visible bandages beneath it. He looked out at his congregation, families he'd served for 5 years, people he'd risked everything to protect. My friends, he began, his voice thick with emotion. This Christmas Eve, I want to talk about something I've learned today, about violence and peace, about justice and mercy, about who we are and who we can become. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Today I picked up weapons I'd sworn never to touch again. I broke vows I'd made to God. I became something I'd promised I'd never be. And I won't stand here and tell you I feel good about it. But I will tell you this. There's a difference between violence born from hate and strength used to protect those we love. Today, I chose to stand between evil and innocence, and I pray that God understand that choice. But here's what I learned. Even in the midst of battle, even when facing the darkest of men, redemption is possible. Tommy Sullivan, who rode with Morrison's gang, risked his life to warn us and fought alongside us. Black Jack Morrison, who came here to destroy this church, surrendered when given the choice between death and mercy. This is the message of Christmas, that no one is beyond saving. That light can pierce any darkness. That love can conquer hate, if we're brave enough to offer it. The congregation was silent, many wiping tears from their eyes. Tomorrow, we celebrate the birth of Christ. But tonight, we celebrate something else, that this church still stands, that this community endures, that evil came to our door and we refuse to let it in. Merry Christmas, Cedar Ridge. We're going home. After the service, Father Michael met with Bishop Garrett, who traveled from Fort Worth upon hearing the news. Father O'Brien, the bishop said gravely, "What you did was remarkable, but we must discuss the implications. You took up arms. You engaged in violence. These actions—" "I know," Father Michael interrupted. "I'm resigning from the priesthood." The bishop was surprised. "Father, that's not necessary, given the circumstances." "It is necessary," Father Michael said firmly but gently. "I broke my vows. I became what I'd sworn never to be again. I can't stand at that altar and pretend I'm worthy. So what will you do?" Father Michael looked at his church, at the people still gathered outside, singing carols into the night. "I'll stay in Cedar Ridge. This community needs protection, and the law is still too far away. I'll help however I can, maybe as a marshal, maybe something else. I'll still serve God, but in a different way, a way that's honest about who I am and what I'm capable of." The bishop considered this. "You know, Father, sometimes the greatest act of faith is not avoiding battle, but knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. What you did today demonstrated both. Perhaps God doesn't want you to stop being a priest. Perhaps he wants you to be a different kind of shepherd." Christmas morning, 1883. Father Michael, or rather Michael O'Brien, for he could no longer call himself father, in good conscience, stood outside the church at dawn. But something unexpected happened. The entire town showed up. Every family, every child. They stood before him silently. Then Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "Mr. O'Brien, we heard you're planning to leave the priesthood. We want you to know you're our priest, not because of your vows or your collar, but because of your heart. What you did yesterday, standing between us and evil, that's what a shepherd does. So please, if you'll have us, continue to be our father." One by one, every person in Cedar Ridge nodded their agreement. Michael O'Brien felt tears streaming down his face. He looked at these people, these good, simple, faithful people, and realized something profound. Redemption doesn't come from perfection. It comes from choosing to do right even when it costs us everything. "I'll stay," he said simply, "and I'll serve you the best way I know how, as both a man of God and a protector of his people." The church bells rang out across Cedar Ridge, announcing Christmas morning, and Father Michael O'Brien led his congregation inside for the most meaningful Christmas service of his life. This is the true story of Father Michael O'Brien, the holy priest who became a warrior to protect his flock. Historical records show he served Cedar Ridge for another 30 years, both as a priest and as an unofficial lawman. He never killed anyone in all those years, but his reputation was enough to keep outlaws away. Black Jack Morrison served 20 years in prison and, according to records, became a model prisoner who taught other inmates to read using the Bible Father Michael sent him. Tommy Sullivan served 5 years and afterward became a deputy sheriff, dedicating his life to making amends. This story teaches us something powerful, that faith doesn't mean refusing to fight. Sometimes faith means standing up when everyone else runs away. It means offering mercy even to those who deserve judgment. It means being strong enough to protect, but wise enough to know when to lower your weapons. I want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments, just your state or city, and tell me, what would you have done in Father Michael's position? Would you have fought? Would you have fled? Would you have offered Morrison mercy? And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got more incredible true stories of faith, courage, and redemption coming your way. Thank you for spending this hour with me. Remember, sometimes the greatest warrior is the one who knows when not to fight. And sometimes the greatest act of faith is standing firm when darkness comes knocking. Merry Christmas. And may you find the courage to stand for what's right, whatever that costs.